Okay. Thank you very much. I'm very excited to be here. I've traveled all around the globe. I came from California. I did a stop in Thailand, and here I am. So I'm glad to be here and share the story. It's something you will not find anywhere else. And we'll start with kind of an intro video of the launch. Of course, this is a generated video, but it's very realistic. And just a couple of words, and I'll have some things to say as the video continues. Are we able to drop the room lights a little, or are we going to keep it like this? Just a little bit. It'll be a little bit more enjoyable if we can have a little bit lower, if that's okay. Let me start with saying that James Webb is an observatory, and in order to get it in space, we need to launch it. Imagine something as big as a tennis court. How are you going to get it into space? Well, this is also known as the origami telescope, and you're going to see in this video how that was done. It's folded up into a fairing on this heavy lift Ariane 5, and we're going to see it going to its Lagrange 2 location, and it will unfold into the full observatory on the way. And I'll have just a couple of words as we go. Okay.
Vidéo, attention pour le décompte final. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, top. Allumage Vulcain. Allumage de CAP, décollage.
And you'll see in a minute, okay, there's our stages. They've done their job. And now, once we are above the atmosphere, we let the fairing, I guess, eject. And the telescope is all folded up. Okay, this is not a useful observatory at the moment, but it's got a very precise unfolding sequence where it becomes an observatory. And remember, the alignment is critical, and we're talking about nanometers. So we need very good alignment. There are things we can do once it's at the Lagrange 2, but again, a lot of single point failures. We were all nervous when this went up. The thing that I worked on is what I call the heart of the telescope, and that is the telescope's mirrors. And you can see them in these images, and they are gold coated. So if you see something gold and hexagonal, that is what we worked on. And there's an unfolding sequence. Got our solar cells, we got our communication. And here is the solar shield, and it's a 5-layered Kapton umbrella, really, that lets our telescope stay cold. The mirrors are made to look good at 40 Kelvin, and if the sun were to get to them, it wouldn't be the observatory it is today. Thank you. So that's want to give you some context. Let me close that and start the main presentation. Give me a second. My apologies. I'm the polishing guy, but my presentation skills maybe not so much. So thank you. Oh. Okay, you can see, oh, it's beautiful. Okay, how many of you are following the incredible James Webb Space Telescope? Anybody? Yes. Well, I think we can all agree that it is truly a marvel, and it is just now revealing the cosmos like never before. But have you ever wondered how the heart of the telescope, its mirrors, were created? Now imagine taking a behind-the-scenes look, and that's just what we're going to do today. I will share the incredible story, both the beauty and the challenges of JWST mirror making, something you will not find anywhere else. Hi, my name is Glen Cole. I'm a tool maker. Specifically, I make telescope mirrors. And for the last 41 years, I've created some of the world's greatest telescopes. As I like to say, I'm not Carl Sagan or Stephen Hawking, but I did make their telescopes. If I may share an analogy, the astronomers are the race car drivers, and we built their Formula One beauty. We are the enablers of their amazing science. On James Webb, I was the chief engineer for the mirror polishing. I was the general with my desk out on the optical shop floor polishing our Webb mirrors. Let me now share our story. And I'll give you a little disclaimer. This is a true story. The people in this have been, if you know what this is, photoshopped. So you won't see anybody familiar because I have protected their identities altogether. This is based on a true story and my flawed memory and the published monthly status reports. And yes, this is the story about JWST, but as your guide, a bit of my history is shown on this page. It all started, as I said, 41 years ago with the systems in the upper left. This was my first job with my father, also a mirror maker, and we worked with Dr. Charles Townes, the Nobel laureate and co-inventor of the laser. We polished the two 2-meter flats and two 1.65-meter parabolas for 2 of the 3 systems shown here. I should probably use the laser pointer. These are known as infrared spatial interferometers. And also, we can see a bit of my work in the lower left, what I call the dark side. These are classified systems, lightweight, very large, light-weighted optics. And further, we see what is called the SALT telescope. That's the South African Large Telescope, a segmented primary mirror. And of course, foremost on my mind, the James Webb Space Telescope. And in preparation for Webb, there was something called AMSD, the Advanced Mirror System Demonstrator, AMSD. And it was a competition of telescope architectures. And central within this architecture were the telescope mirror segment designs. I was working at Eastman Kodak at the time, and you can see our beautiful entry over here. This is a lightweight, low temperature fused honeycomb sandwich glass mirror, and it was a work of art just in the creation of the blank, and you can see just how beautiful it is. This is made out of a zero coefficient glass, what we call ULE. And on the right, we see the competing mirror. This was a competition to see what approach was the best for this telescope. And this is an open back beryllium substrate, and the engineer gives you a sense of the scale of the segments. And it was also quite a bit of work just in creating the substrate itself. This was an important decision and central to the JWST telescope design and, drumroll, The winning design was the ball beryllium approach. This was as exciting for some as it was devastating for others. In the central performance box, for the nerds amongst us, we probably have a few here, we can see the earth-shattering specifications, not for the faint of heart. So with that, I was personally fortunate enough to be selected to lead the polishing team out west, and I soon found myself as the chief engineer in charge of the beryllium mirror polishing out at what I will call Thomson Freeform. Yes, I had transitioned from one team to the other and to the beautiful and complex beryllium mirror making. And in the early days at Thomson, what I call the good old days, we had a lot of work ahead of us in what I call facilitization. Not only did we need to create a custom polishing facility, we needed to create all of the equipment and tooling as well. Polishing machines, measuring equipment, and handling systems, etc. Here we see the proud parents of baby Webb taking their baby Webb out for a stroll around the block. And the neighbor asks for a better look at baby Webb, and wow, is he surprised. And I'd like to just add that, first of all, I don't get out much, and I'm starved for entertainment. So that'll explain the cartoons. And here we see the details relative to the primary mirror array. You see that these are hexagons. There's 18 of them. To get more specific, we have 3 types. We have an A, a B, and a C. These are all different shapes. The point here is creating a primary mirror that looks essentially like a single surface, very nearly parabolic in this case. And I'll tell you some tricks later, but essentially the light from infinity needs to impinge upon this primary mirror and not just have a minor effect, the fact that it's been segmented. And after a solid year and a half, we were able to call the brand new facility complete. This is a dedicated facility. It was a big affair for all of the tiered partners from Ball to Northrop and NASA attending this dedication. It was a proud moment and a job well done. Our team had outdone themselves and created a top-notch, dedicated optical shop specific to JWST. But as we would find out later, there were still many nuances in direct beryllium polishing that stood between us and the finish line. And here we have our large polishing machines. There were 7 of them. And this you will not find anywhere else. This is a look at our polishing shop that we created. We started with large machining bases, and we added our own modular grinding and polishing accessories to that. They're proprietary. I can't go into the details, but we had to create these essentially from scratch. This is the granddaddy of them all. We call LCP01. That was sort of the first one we built, and it worked really, really well. And you can also see the U.S. flag over here. This is what we call the command center. And I had my desk out on the optical shop floor with the process engineers. This is really the decision area for what to do next. How to respond to measurements. How to take a measurement and decide how to polish. And beryllium. As I said, the mirrors were made out of beryllium. This is the 4th element in the periodic table. The 030 beryllium was formulated specially for the Webb mirrors, and it represented a step forward in terms of material properties. It was more isotropic than any other beryllium type at that point in time. The boules, as we call them, are created by hipping. This is a process where the beryllium powder is placed in a container, heated and pressurized, and it resembles sintering in my world. After the creation, this 030 beryllium has a CTE, or coefficient of thermal expansion, of nearly 0 at 40 Kelvin. But the challenge, of course, is that at room temperature, the CTE wasn't that good. And you can get a little bit of an idea of the light weighting, as we call it. This is an open back, light weighted beryllium blank, if you will, or substrate. And you can see these very thin ribs. And this is very light and stiff for its weight. It's really an incredible structure. And of course, as I mentioned, the beryllium was toxic. We had many strict beryllium protocols, and we hired a beryllium safety officer to help keep us safe. We had periodic blood tests and took the leading indicators of berylliosis very seriously. And this first cartoon, well, it's actually what happened. It's actually not, it's not exactly funny. It's more painful. But as I say here, one day we had there's 50 on the team. So at one day we all gave our blood samples, and we needed to do that in order to work on the program, which is great. We're all good. We're all very dedicated in JWST. And my safety officer, see, be safe, my safety officer came to me and said, sir, we lost the samples in the mail. Well, needless to say, I was not happy. And we all had to give blood again. But it was very important to keep everybody safe. And so we always wanted to stay on top of that. That was one of our very important things that was really principal to the whole effort. Also, beryllium safety related, I remember, now this is true too, I can't give the names, but there were a couple of my guys, I say my guys, a couple of the technicians were out, having a break in their cigarette smoking shelter. And the one fellow says to the other, you really should, double glove. You should have 2 pair of gloves on top of each other in order to keep yourself safe. And the other guy reminds him that there's actually, you do realize there's actually more beryllium in your cigarette than the entire optical shop. So let's not get too excited, guys, about double gloving. Just be careful, you're smoking. So anyway. And pitting. The fear of pitting hung over our heads for the duration of the project. As we were direct polishing the beryllium, the risk of pitting depended on the chemistry of the slurry that we used. The greatest fear for us was that there would be too many pits and we'd have to basically go backwards in the entire process and go back to what we call the grind, and nobody wanted that. The central image, this is our Keon's, basically our microscope station, and we would look at the pits on the surface to see if they were getting worse, if they were evolving. So if we found a pit, we would measure it, its location, and we would take a look at it with the microscope. How big are these pits? Well, this is magnified. These are, let's just say, 20 microns in extent. But what you have to remember is that we're perfectionists. This really bothered us. We were very careful with the chemistry so that we tried to avoid, but there were occasions when we would have these almost microscopic pits, but it bothered us, and we really tried to avoid that with our slurry chemistry. And of course, we never wanted to go back and grind. This is one of our inspectors, and when you saw a pit with a magnifier, of course, it looked terrible. And of course, as I mentioned, slurry chemistry was important. If it was too strong, you'd risk pitting, and if it was too weak, it took forever. So I'm a glass guy. Most of the work I've done in my career is polishing glass. Beryllium is a whole different creature, and it is slow, really slow. So Norbert, my lead process engineer, was always tempted to play with the slurry and make the polishing a little faster, but be careful, because who knows, you might have a disaster if you got too excited about that. So Norbert, I had to watch him. He's great. And here we see, this is a different mirror. This is a tertiary mirror. We'll talk a little bit more about this later, but in this case, related to pitting, we actually tried what's called dye penetrant. And if you've ever used this, it'll fluoresce. If you get the dye, say it was in a pit, you'd see it fluoresce. But even with this, these pits were so small, this turned out to be difficult, even with this approach. And of course, as I mentioned, first of all, I don't get out much, and I'm starved for entertainment. So the pitting situation was the perfect opportunity to ask the new process engineer to go get the beryllium putty. Let me explain. There is no beryllium putty. Only the opportunity to have the new guy ask the senior guys like me, if he should go get the putty to fill the pits in segment A6. So we had a little fun along the way. We're really serious, but we did have a little fun. And the Engineering Development Unit, the EDU as we called it. The EDU was the workhorse for the process development and refinement. The idea was that the EDU would lead all of the other flight segments by 6 weeks. We called that the EDU buffer. This is great, except that the EDU hit all of the potholes on the road as we continued on the journey. So the EDU, as a pathfinder, it sounds really great, but there was always a lot of pressure to get that, keep it ahead of the other segments and keep it as the leader of the pack. And some actual real photos here. On the grinding machine here, we can see a segment. We see the grinding head. This is the actual machine that was used. We can see the EDU progression in terms of surface figure versus the schedule. So we had a schedule that said it should, go on this straight line and be finished right here. And the EDU, we actually did a little better than that. Of course, in the real world, it's not a straight road. It's not anyway. But this will give you some ideas of how we visualize the surface, and we can see some. These are different ways to visualize. This is early in the process, and then as we work through our figure grinding, we can see that it's getting much better if we look at these surface figure numbers. And of course, this is a process of iterating between measuring and grinding, or measuring and polishing. So here we see the EDU on a measuring machine we call the CMM, or a coordinate measuring machine. And this is one of 3 specially designed machines. It's temperature controlled, and we were able to actually measure mechanically by touching the surface within about 1/4 of a micron. So we got a lot of good measurements of surfaces using our very beautiful CMMs. And just a beauty shot. It's interesting to see the one of the segments on the measuring the CMM here, and you can see the open back rib structure underneath. And this is also, again, a beauty shot, if you will. There's a couple of different ways of looking at the same surface. We see this is what we call in the optics world, this is a fringe map of the surface. So these black lines represent equal heights, and you can see all of these. This is a crazy looking thing because this was very early. This is actually more interesting when later on it's not quite as interesting. This looks scary, but basically this was part of the process. So we have our sort of color coded here. This tells you that the reds are high, so we have some highs in the red areas. And of course the blues are lower. So this is a way for us to visualize how the surface is progressing. Now, something interesting that most people don't know about is called quilting. And you see these little bumps, and you say, well, what are these bumps? How did that happen? Imagine that you're putting polishing pressure on the surface, and you have some places with ribs, and some places are open. So when you do that polishing, and you take the tool off, in between the ribs, it comes up. And we call those quilts, like a bedspread, like a quilt for your bed. So this is quilting. Now remember, this is early. There are no quilts in our optics on the James Webb. This is just early. These are some of the things that we had to work through. And another difficulty or challenge, I should say, was that something we call micro yield. And it is a misunderstood property of beryllium. Beryllium's a beautiful material, high specific stiffness, good CTE at cryo temperatures, and so forth. But if you stress it, if you put too much stress in it, it remembers that. If you exceed the micro yield limit, this will be unstable over time. So imagine you're in optics, you're making mirrors, and one of the things you want to make is you want to make the correct surface, but you want to make it stable. It should not be changing 5 years from now. It needs to be stable for a long time because you invested all this effort to make this perfect shape for the telescope, and we had to use what we call the thermal cryo chamber to mitigate those stresses or remedy that effect. So this was a chamber. It's kind of like an oven, but it wasn't just an oven. It was an oven and a freezer. So I can't tell you the cycle, but it had to go hot and cold. We used liquid nitrogen to make it quite cold. And by doing that, it would relieve the stresses within the metal. So the substrate would become more stable. So if you're making optics, one of the things you want, it needs to be stable. It's got to be stable for years and years and years. So we had to work through a lot of stresses. We see a couple of guys here. We're going to put this in the chamber. We're going to close it down. We're going to run through the cycle. And this is a little cartoon to kind of explain how much time it took. So the good news is that we finally finished the cryocycling of segment B3. And the bad news, I just retired. We spent more time in the cryo chamber than polishing. And just understand, beryllium is slow. It takes a long time to polish. We spent a huge amount of extra time, important time, to make sure it was stable. And we had to spend a lot of time in these chambers. And handling. And at first glance, you say, oh my goodness, this is a precarious picture. But let's back up. In spite of its size, the blanks were actually easily lifted by 2 trained technicians. The tricky part was to avoid touching those fragile ribs that you saw on the back side. So we did plenty of practice with our surrogate mirror, but in any case, we needed a safer approach. And also, I just want to point out in the background, you see, a little hard to see, this gentleman here, he's got what's called a PAM, a personal air monitor. Why is he wearing this thing? Early on, we needed to understand what our risk was for beryllium particles. And so we had a PAM and it had a filter media, and we would do an operation like this handling operation, and then we would take this filter media out and have it analyzed for beryllium. And based on the analysis, we would adjust the process to make sure that we weren't getting exposed to beryllium. And yes, there even were occasions when we flipped the segments by hand, and I've done it myself. And let me remind you, this has been photoshopped. Believe me, nobody was enjoying a hand flip. We were deadly serious. We weren't smiling. It wasn't pleasant, but it just reminded us in the early phases that we needed to mechanize these kind of operations and make them lower risk, and we did that. And I'll show you some details about the handling system that we had to develop. And part of that, central to it really, is this fixture transfer station. And here we see what we call the FTS. And this is something where we could flip segments, we could exchange standard carriage to a cryo carriage and that kind of thing. So we did start to mechanize. We didn't do a lot of handwork except for these very small optics that we'll see in a minute, which are the secondary and tertiary. And of course, messy business. You see all of this, it's a little hard to see, but you see all this gray material is coming. This is plastic skirting, right? This is plastic trying to keep, manage the mess, and we got vinyl tape here. Anyway, this is what we call swarf. What is swarf? The gray stuff. That is beryllium particles and spent abrasive. But we needed to manage this in order to keep ourselves safe, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. And also cleaning. We spent a huge amount of time cleaning. After every run, whether it was grinding or polishing, before you went to the measurement, the metrology as we call it, you can be sure that we were going to be doing a lot of cleaning. And these are big. You can see how big these are. This was almost always done with 2 people. And you can see also when we got close and the segments were polished, we had to be careful to not degrade the surface, and we did what's called drag wipes. So it was a very arduous but important part of the process to keep ourselves safe and to get good measurements on those surfaces without any swarf. This is our cleaning system. DI water in. All of the spent abrasive and water would be put in this tank, and then we would, we had some outside storage tanks where we would collect it, and an outside company would manage the waste for us. It's toxic. And the process engineers. They were in charge of interpreting the metrology data and creating what we called run files, whether it was grinding or polishing. And we, as I mentioned, myself included, yeah, I could show you where I am. That's actually me, the cartoon. Anyway, we worked out in what we call the command center, and this is rather central to the polishing and the metrology. And you can see the precarious position that the process engineers were in, always wondering whether we should tweak the process or not, and of course this is a very delicate proposition. Please, please be careful. And this is interesting for me. One day, midway through the program, we had a visit from the chief scientist of Webb, and he opened up with an impromptu speech where he had plenty of praise for the Mirror Makers, but he also shared what kept him up at night. He feared that the 5-layered sun shield would malfunction and make it a moot point of how fantastic our beryllium mirrors were. He said, "I worry about something much simpler than the mirrors, the sun shield. Even though it's simpler, it is still critical to our mission," he said. "If the sun shield malfunctions, your beautiful mirrors will be for naught." And we also worried about it on the process engineering side. And I still remember the day when Norbert came up to me, and we were talking about this sun shield, and he said, "What are we going to do if this happens?" And I said that I would go up there and untangle, I can't use all the words, the darned thing, and fix it myself if necessary. And he looked me in the eye and he said, "No, you won't. We don't have the technology. It's a one-way trip." And I said, "I don't care. I'll go up and fix the thing and happily float off into cryogenic space afterwards with a smile on my face." Now, you may not believe that's a true story. I'm serious. I would go up there and fix it. That's how dedicated we were to the cosmos, to JWST. I would go up there. I might have an argument with my wife, but I would go up there and fix it and go off into space. So that's a true story. And you may not believe me. That's the truth. That's called passion. And here are the process engineers, and there were a lot of things to worry about. As you can see, we were walking the tightrope of mirror making. These are the process engineers creating their run files. And here's me encouraging, "Yeah, we're doing good, guys, we're good." And he's like, "Oh my goodness, edge roll, pits, scratching, roughness." We had to worry about all of these things. Every run, there was the risk of some dramatic failure. Remember, these are very valuable segments. We only have one spare for each type. $30 million. Each one of these is very valuable. 30 million American dollars. Polishing. Here we see some direct polishing. This is actually called smooth out polishing, and the slurry details are proprietary, but we needed to manage the slurry in order to get the polishing just in the sweet spot without getting those dreaded pits. And you can see our delivery system, very simple nozzles, entrained abrasive. Anyway, I can't go into all the details, but you see, get the idea of what's involved. And when those segments were polished up, they were beautiful. Well, what can I say? They went from this very dull gray kind of matte finish. They polished up pretty nice. They were quite impressive. We were proud when they got to this point. A lot of work, but we loved it. And this is another important thing. Remember, this telescope is made at room temperature, like this kind of a temperature. It's used at 40 Kelvin, cryogenic temperatures. And how are you going to manage that? Because the shape changes. If I make the perfect mirror in this room and I take it up to cryogenic space at 40 Kelvin, it's not good. It's a terrible shape now. It changes that much. Here we see what we had to do was, after we got a good polish on it, we would go to the XRCF cryogenic chamber and establish what we called the cryo backout. In other words, we needed to account for the surface figure change due to this cryogenic temperature. Here we see an example, and at room temperature, you see it's about 103 nanometers RMS. Now, if you're not into optics, you maybe don't know what this is, but these are on the same color scale. So you can see that this is how it looks at room temperature. But if you do things properly, when it goes down to 40 Kelvin, it's much better. This is a 20 nanometers RMS it's a good number. If you're in optics, you know that's a good number. So each of these segments had its own segment-specific cryo backout. A1 was not like A2. C3 was not like C5. Each one of them had their own backout. We had to measure it cold, calculate that backout, and apply that in our room temperature optical shop so that when they were finished, they didn't look that great, but if you took them cold, they were beautiful. So room temperature looked funny, looked not so good. You take them into space, Lagrange 2, 40 Kelvin, they were amazing. And another concern was edges, and it doesn't look like me, this is actually me here. We would put test plates, do a little Fizeau interferometry at the edge to check for roll. Well, what is it about, what do you mean edge roll, what is that? Well, remember that when you have a polishing tool and it's going over the edge, that the polishing dynamics change. There's slurry distribution, there's pressure changes. Anyway, it's really easy to roll an edge. If you're an optical guy, you know. It's very easy to roll an edge. It happens on its own. So we had some strategies for minimizing that, and we kept an eye on these edges because we only had a 5 millimeter edge relief. What does that mean? We received hexagons. The surface, this incredible nanometer type surface, had to be good to within less than 5 millimeters of that bevel right out at the edge. Not easy, but we were able to do it. And you can see the technician here. He's trying to show the bosses really that he's not afraid of edges. Of course, he's kind of lost it. He's on the edge of the polishing machine there, but he's showing us that he's not afraid of edges. By the way, we're all afraid of edges, so I'll just let you know. Be honest. And our metrologists, what does that mean? The measuring people. These are amazing people. These people had to account for all kinds of details to make sure that the measurements were accurate. They were the map makers, if you will. And they had to account for, cryo backouts, test set backouts, CGHs, all of these complexities. And I guess there was a little mystique. This is me looking into the metrology meeting, and I don't know if you have these here, but they needed their Ouija board, and they got a crystal ball. Now, they didn't use that. I'm just telling you, we thought they were doing magic, okay? They were doing some amazing things behind the curtain there, and we respected everything that they did. Here's a bird's eye view of the test set. If you know optical tests, our interferometer here, fold flat, actual segment down here. We'll show you some more details about this. These are giant granite slabs. You're looking down on, these are many meters long. I forget exactly how many. Just say 3 by 5 meters each. Heavy, too. And the magic, metrology magic. If you're in optics, you may know what these are. These are computer-generated holograms. These elements establish the reference wavefront. We're comparing against the wavefront that this establishes, and we take the test wavefront off the surface, and we compare it, we interfere it with the reference, and the difference between those two tells us where to polish. If we see a high spot, we're going to spend more time on that. If we see a low spot, we're going to spend less time on that. That's how we converge using the metrology. And here's our, what I call alignment robot. I don't think that's the real name for it, but essentially this segment is getting ready for a test, and we have 6 degrees of freedom. We have to line this up. In order to get a good test, we've got to align this in, imagine, all 6 degrees of freedom. And we also use the Shack-Hartman. I won't spend a lot of time on this, but it was a way to measure the surfaces in the grind. Normally, if you're measuring a surface, you do it when the surface is polished. You don't do it in the grind because you won't get a good return. The Shack-Hartman would allow us to test in the infrared, and we would piece together sub-apertures, cookies with overlaps. It's a long story, but basically we were able to measure the ground surface. And here are the heroes of the JWST effort. These are the technicians, what I call the hands people. These are the heroes. These are the people that actually ran the grinding runs and the polishing runs, kept the machines moving 3 shifts a day, 5 days a week. We called it 24/5 operations. And of course, we did run on the weekends with our cryothermal chambers. And sometimes this was arduous. This was difficult. The beryllium protocols were stifling. I think I remember one day I went up to our safety officer and I said, "This is inhumane. We're not able, we have to work all day in the polishing shop and you can't drink anything. No water, no tea, no coffee." So I was just showing here in my little cartoon how the guy's on 3rd shift. Of course, this is 3:30 in the morning. And wow, the coffee straw is a great idea. Number 1, coffee is the nectar of the gods. And number 2, the combination of coffee and 3rd shift is a force of nature, my friend, a force of nature. Now, we never did this, and we never did get permission to drink water in the shop. So if you wanted to, you know, have some water or take a break or something, you had to take all your beryllium clothes off and get through the, you know, out to the changing room and all of these things. And anomalies. What do I mean? Anytime something went wrong, it was an anomaly. Let's say we scratched the mirror, or there was too much pressure, or we didn't handle it right and there was some stress. That we called an anomaly. And you can bet that anytime there was an anomaly, we had people on planes the next day. They're coming out and they're going to talk to us. And these are NASA consultants, Northrop Grumman, Ball Aerospace, and we would meet at the large conference room. Here's an example. They forgot a step in the check sheet for storing segment C3 in the cabinet. What happened? You know, and then the next thing it was like, good thing we came out to help solve this could have been a big problem. And then this guy, I consider this a near miss of massive proportions. And then in summary, we almost had a problem. So here's our these are the military helicopters outside, circling outside the Black Hawk. We call them Black Hawk helicopters. So it was a big deal. And these are good people, don't get me wrong, but we got a lot of help, and we tried to avoid, as I say, avoid the pain that had not yet come. So we didn't want, the visitors were great, but we prefer to not have any problems. And communication. What do I mean by that? Communication was critical. Anytime something happened, an anomaly, we found out the hard way, you really needed to communicate properly. If you did it wrong, you missed a person in the loop. Let's say you're supposed to talk to Joe, but you didn't talk to Joe, you talked to John. That was not good. If you hesitated, that was not good. So the best thing to do is just tell the truth and follow the communication rules. And here we see, you know, it starts off real simple at the polishing group, Thompson, something's up. And then by the time it gets to the next partner, Ball Aerospace, it ain't good. You better get out here. We need some help. You know, this is part safety critical. And the next thing, the NASA guy goes, we've got a big problem. So the communication can get out of hand if you're not careful. And you please just communicate properly. And again, avoid the pain that has not yet come. And a bump in the night. What does this mean? Well, I'm a glass guy. I spent 41 years polishing glass. The one thing with glass that I like glass, I like polishing, but the one thing about it is if you exceed the strength of the glass, you get a permanent record of that in your optic. So you get a permanent record of a crack or a scratch or whatnot. The thing with this beryllium, there's a lot of challenges. You know, the pitting, it's toxic, all these problems. But the one thing about beryllium is it was tough. If I were to, this almost hurts me to say this, if I were to drop this plastic, now we're very careful, but what if I dropped this on, okay, just pretend. It hurts my soul to talk about putting something on an optic. If I were to put this pin on the optic, we would have to report that. Okay, that's a problem report. We have to talk about it. We have to analyze it. We have to pull that segment out of production. We got to put it in the cabinet, and a whole bunch of things started happening. But the one thing we found out, and I won't go into too many details because the segments are great and everything's working great on Webb, but we got second chances. Okay, on glass, you don't get second chances. You got the permanent record, you know, with a fracture or a chip or other things. With beryllium, sometimes we got an extra chance. If we put a little too much stress into it, a little too much load, it survived. Now, the only thing was the stress, micro yield. So now we had to run, if we put too much, let's say we bent it for some reason, a little too much stress, now we got to cryocycle it for a long time. So, but we could manage that. It wasn't catastrophic in our activities. And I'd just like to move on to secondary mirror. So the light from the cosmos, it hits the primary, those 18 segments, and then it folds, and it goes to the convex secondary. Here we see the secondary, and it's being measured in metrology, and we see it in grind. So that's why you see it's not a nice shiny surface, it's kind of a ground surface. And we get a little more detail. This is a ruby probe, and we're touching that surface, and this is a ground surface. And this is actually during a smooth out grind run, and you can see it's kind of a back and forth. I can't go into details of the motion, but you can see the motion there in the swarf, as we call it. And here's a beauty shot of the backside. This is interesting. The secondary had the same light weighting rib structure, but we did allow the senior technicians to handle it. And you can see that they have to be grabbing it on there's some thicker areas under their thumbs. You can't tell, but there's some thicker regions here. And they practice with our practice part. But it was very important to handle this, and everybody couldn't do it. Just our senior guys could do it. And here's an early look at that surface. You see, again, that little bit of quilting, these little bumps here. And here's the secondary on its own intermediate size polishing machine. So it had its own machine. And when it shined up, it was beautiful. Now this is on a CMM. You can see the ruby probe here. And you see that once it polished up, it was amazing. This is a convex secondary, hyperbolic. And here we see a lively discussion in front of the secondary polish. Now, this is actually me. It doesn't look like me because we photoshopped. And this is Norbert, and we're having a discussion. Is the discussion meaning, we're very serious about this. This wasn't fun and games. Okay, we're just completely serious. And here we see a beauty shot of a secondary mirror. Oh my goodness, gold coated. Is that pure gold? Of course. That gives us the reflectance we need to do science. Can we do science with beryllium surfaces? Yes. Is the science as good? No. We get a better reflectance profile with the gold. So to give us the science that we needed, all of the segments were gold coated. And another beautiful shot. I love them when they're coated. They're beautiful. Hard to deny. And we also had a tertiary. So there's a few folds in our observatory. Again, primary. You saw the secondary. And then the third mirror we call the tertiary. And these technicians are doing a flip. They're going to measure the tertiary in the metrology room at the CMM. And it also had its grinding operations. We see it's actually on one of the large grinding machines, just like the primaries. We were able to do this tertiary mirror on those machines. And just an early measurement. Again, not the most beautiful shot, but this is just a way to visualize how the surface looked at this point. This is not a good looking surface, but it is what it is back in the early days. And here we see some mechanical measurements on the CMM. And once it was finished, polished, and coated, oh my goodness, there we go, another gold coating. So the tertiary it just came out of the coating chamber. You see some of the foil here. You see sort of the overspray of this gold. Yeah, it's all gold, guys. It's real gold. Not a lot of gold, very thin, very accurate. And here we go. This is being integrated into the structure. And another thing to mention is the shipping. Every time we wanted to make a cryo test, let's say we were polished out and we want to take A3, we want to know what's the cryo back out, that kind of thing. We had to ship it. How many would we put on a truck? 1. We could not risk these segments. We could not put 2 on a truck. That was not, we didn't do it. These are very valuable. We only had one backup for each segment type. So if we were shipping A3 on a big semi truck to Alabama to go to the XRCF chamber, there was 1. This seems a little crazy, but here this is going to go get measured at the XRCF, get our cryo back out. And further along in the process, once things were polished, we had these really fancy shipping containers for the primary mirror segments. And this is actually, we're getting ready to integrate. You see the segment here is already gold coated and it's got its support system, and they're going to integrate it into the full telescope. And just give you context, here's one of the to give you an idea of the sizes. Here's one of the 18 primary mirror segments. We call them segments. Here's the back side of our secondary and the tertiary. We also had a fine steering mirror, which was directing. So we needed if you're doing science, right, you take the light from the cosmos and you very carefully, fold that light and deliver it to an instrument. And once it hits the primary, secondary, tertiary, the steering mirror would deliver it to one of the 3 instrument groups, I should say. And these are some beauty shots. We worked so long on these. These are, for us, breathtaking. We've got some technicians, of course. He's very careful not to, sorry, hard to say, drop the flashlight, that kind of thing. I spent my whole life, it's in my DNA. It's hard to say it. I don't like it when people talk about breaking things. It hurts my soul. Okay, here's some of the segments. We're getting ready to get those in a big chamber. This is another beauty shot. I thought that was pretty clever. And there we go. There we go. That's what we're making right there. It's beautiful. It's within nanometers of the mathematical shape needed, and it's got this very precise, very, very thin coating on there to give us the science that we need, because it's all about science. This is a tool for science. And this is an interesting shot, and I don't know the full history, but this is bare beryllium, and you can see how that looks as a mirror. It's pretty good, right? I mean, it's a pretty good mirror. And here's another one next to it. It's gold coated. Now, what's the difference? Would this work? It would work, but we would lose science. We don't want to use this beryllium surface because some of the light in some of the spectral regions would be lost in reflection. This gives us a better reflective profile across the spectrum of interest to give us science. And in the chamber, this I don't know why this guy is here, but it makes a dramatic, you shouldn't be standing there, it's all bad. But anyway, we're getting ready to measure these segments. They're not, in the real telescope, they're not like this, okay? They're not spaced apart. This was for testing. We got some fiducials. You can, if you're in optics, you know what fiducials are. Helps you know, how do you map where the surface is? How do you know where things are? Use things called fiducials. And yes, there's a chamber, a NASA chamber, big enough for the entire telescope. And I wasn't there. I just find this an incredibly interesting photo. And this presentation is dedicated to the Websters, the technicians, metrologists, and process engineers. We built the heart of the world's greatest observatory and devoted ourselves to JWST and the cosmos, the beginning. Thank you. It's dramatic music because this is a father and son discussion. I'd like to tell the story. This is unusual, but it's my story. This father and son mirror making team, well, we started 73 years ago when a 14-year-old young man made his own telescope by hand, my father. So he started young, 14 years old, he's making his own telescope. He works his way through college. He's working at the planetarium, doing star shows. He's writing the shows. He's giving the talks in college. And he's doing this in Fort Worth, Texas. And I'm a little baby, okay? So he's doing this, and he graduates. He goes and gets a job at Kitt Peak National Observatory, making the large ground-based telescopes back in the 60s and 70s, up to 4-meter telescopes. We're going to share a story with you, a little bit more. We worked to get, my father worked for about 20 years at Kitt Peak. Then we teamed up, believe it or not, this is actually me. This is on this side, this is me. And we worked together for 10 years. We actually made observatory mirrors. You're not going to believe this, but I grew up with it, so I don't know what to say. At home, in our house. What do you mean? You can't make an observatory in your, you can't do it. It's impossible, right? We had a 4-car garage. There was no cars in the garage. Okay, this was an optical shop. And we came up with clever ways of making very large telescope mirrors at home. We grew up with it. 5 kids, we thought it was normal. I mean, like everybody must do this, right? We didn't know, but it was unusual. One day my father calls me. You know, usually kids don't want to do what their parents do. We want to do something else, right? Sometimes we do, but if you're a good kid. But our family, we didn't really want to do that. We wanted to do something else. And so I was a mechanical engineer, and I'm working on helicopters, and life is good. I get a call one day from my father. He says, son, you know that big job I was telling you about? He says, we got it. But I can't do it by myself with mom. It's just I'm serious, it's my mom and dad, okay? At home. And I'm off in college, and my other brothers and sisters are off in college. And basically, he says, I need help. And so I said, for some reason, strange reason, I said yes. I said, I'll join you. And kids don't usually want to, you know, it's kind of scary to, you know, we grew up with all this crazy optics in the house. I joined him. Our first job was with Dr. Charles Towns, the Nobel laureate, inventor of the laser, and it was for two 2-meter flats and 1.65 meter parabolas. First problem, we don't have a machine. What are we going to do? How are you going to, I mean, this is crazy. I mean, we got the job, and there's these big pieces of zero door, 2 meters, some of them. What are you going to do? Well, I had to learn how to weld, okay? And Dad taught me, Dad wasn't a very good, Dad's good at a lot of things, but he wasn't a great welder. But I learned how to weld. This is me when I had hair. And I made this machine, this blue machine here. It's got a nice turntable. Here's I don't remember exactly what this is. That's probably about 1.5, 1.6 meter mirror. And I'm working on it. And here's a polishing. You see the pitch tool here. Interesting thing. If I want to test an optic in an optic shop, I go up here to the center of curvature. Our house wasn't that high. We didn't have a test tower. So you see these bearings here, these pillow block bearings? The machine that we made, I'll be honest, I made, had hydraulic cylinders, which you can't really see, and pillow block bearings, and this whole mirror would tip up on edge. Why? Now I can test at the center of curvature on the other side of the garage. I mean, optical shop. And we're testing this mirror across the room because we couldn't test it. We didn't have a test tower. We're in our house, right? So all of our machines had this tip tilt. So I had to learn to weld, and it's a lot of hard work. Is what it really is to come. You got to be ready when you're just a 2-person optical shop. You got to do everything. We made our own pitch. I mean, who makes pitch? You buy pitch, right? No, we made it. So I want to give you, show you some. The next part is art, and I'm gonna credit my dad. I'll give a little credit to myself, and I'll give some credit to AI, because these are AI generated images. And I'm just going to let you enjoy. I'll try not to talk a lot. It's hard for me not to talk because it's kind of emotional. This is made back in 1962. It's on Kitt Peak. Look at the sun. You can't look at the sun. They teach you when you're a kid. Don't look at the sun. You can look at the sun with this telescope. This is a solar telescope. So this was one of the early ones. When my father joined Kitt Peak, this is one of the first things he worked. I think maybe the first thing he worked on. Not sure. And my father, 4 meter. This is a big piece of glass. It's not segmented. It's 4 meters across. You can put a tape across 4 meters. This is on Kitt Peak. Doing good science today. Here we go, another 4 meter. My father, thank you, Dad, made a 4 meter. It is in the country of Chile, South America. Doing good science today. In Wyoming, an infrared telescope, 2.3 meters in size. We talk about the primary. On the island of Hawaii, on the beautiful Mauna Kea, We have an infrared telescope, NASA's IRTF. My dad made this. I say he made it. He made the mirror, made the primary. And if you've ever been to Mauna Kea, it's incredible. It's hard to explain. It's magical. And guess what? This is in Mexico at San Pedro Martir, 2.1 meter, a respectable telescope on the Baja Peninsula in Mexico. I'm trying to remember some of these. I feel like I made them, but I was actually there. I was a kid and Dad was making it at home. So, you know, this one Dad made. And here is a 2.4 meter on Kitt Peak, Hiltner. And I'm showing this because it's an interesting collection of observatories that a father and son have both contributed to. And 2.3 meter in Australia. Dad and I worked on this together. All over the world. I haven't been to very many of these telescopes. PK Chin, he's been there. I haven't. I make telescopes and then I make the next one. Here we have a 3.5 meter. It's in the state of New Mexico. Very big. Worked on it with Dad, myself and Dad. Apache Point. And this is my world. After graduating, I went to Eastman Kodak and we made classified reconnaissance large lightweight optics. One of my specialties. And that was me only. These I'm doing chronologically as they were seeing what we call first light. So some of these seem out of order, but they're actually not. This is my first job I worked on with my father. These are the Charles Towns infrared spatial interferometers. Up on Mount Wilson in California, near my house. And this is one I worked on, the South African Large Telescope. We call SALT, 11 meters. Beautiful telescope, South Africa. And this is what we were talking about today, the beautiful, amazing, incredible, sorry, I'm excited, JWST, delivering science, giving us purpose, giving astronomers things to work on, making adjustments to the amazing Big Bang Theory because the data is showing us things that don't make sense. It's not consistent with the Big Bang Theory. I have a little course on that, a mini course. JWST. Heart and soul went into this one. It wasn't, like I said before, it wasn't a 9-to-5 job. It wasn't like that for us. It was a passion. We did it for the cosmos. And the 30-meter telescope. I'm working on that today. What you see is a laser guide star. Do you know what that is used for? Okay, let me explain. And I'll just give you a little explanation. Laser guide star. Let's make an artificial star in the upper atmosphere. Let's use a frequency of light that will excite, let's say, sodium, and it should be, theoretically, a point, a star, an artificial star that we made with a laser. So we create this star. Now, we know that that star should be stable, should not be wiggling with the atmosphere, right? So we see the star wiggling. What does that mean? We're looking through an air column, and we're seeing what we call seeing. The air column is making that star wiggle. It shouldn't be it's not actually wiggling, right? We've got this laser beam. It's making a star, and we see the wiggling. What do we do? What do we do? We look at the wiggle, and we have a membrane mirror, and we do an anti-wiggle. We compensate. So when it goes this way, we bend this other flexible mirror, a thin adaptive optic, and we can bend it and correct and anti-wiggle it. So we can do this fast and keep that artificial star where it should be. And what does that do for you? You've made a correction for the atmospheric turbulence. You've corrected your air column pretty well, and you now are getting better science because of it. So this is very important. So let me show you more. So TMT, it's not done. This is, we're working on it. We got 492 segments. We have about 93 right now. And I say segments, they're actually what we have now around. They're not even hexed yet, so got a lot of work. All right, and the next thing I'll show you, there's a little fly-through video. Imagine you're a fly or a dragon. Let's say, I don't like fly. How about a dragonfly? You're a dragonfly and you're flying through the telescope, okay? I don't want to say a drone, but let's just say you're a dragonfly. It's better. Okay, I'll just let you enjoy. This is computer generated, guys. This does not exist yet, just to let you know. And we're looking down. We're at the top of the dome, 60 meters high. This dome, big. Now we're looking down. There's 492 hexagons, right? So we have, there's our hexagons, 492. In the middle is our tertiary mirror. It looks little, but that's 3 meters across. Okay, that's a big flat. And that steers to instruments. So we're able to steer the light to a variety of instruments on the Naismith platform. It's a very interesting design. It gives us a lot of flexibility. I think I have to keep going, or this is gonna, okay.